The road to Hickory Hollow twisted through the Kentucky hills like a ribbon of dust and memory. A faint fog hung over the valley that morning in 1907, and the locals said the air carried whispers if you stood still long enough. At the edge of a clearing stood a small wooden building, one room, one bell, and one secret. Its walls leaned tiredly against the wind, and the paint had faded to the color of smoke. The glass panes were cracked like spider webs, and its door creaked as though it had been sighing for decades. The people in the nearby town of Dunhaven rarely came near it. They called it the schoolhouse that never forgot. No one had taught there in nearly 10 years. But that autumn, a young woman named Miss Clara Bell arrived on the morning stagecoach. A teacher with more courage than most and a heart too kind for her own safety. When she asked for directions to Hickory Hollow, the driver turned pale. "Miss," he muttered, "you'd best pray that old schoolhouse don't remember you too." Clara only smiled, clutching her worn leather suitcase. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it's time someone remembered it kindly." Clara was 23, bright-eyed, plain but radiant in her confidence, with a warmth that made people listen when she spoke. She had grown up in Lexington, dreaming of teaching in the quiet countryside, where she believed kindness could still make a difference. Her first sight of Hickory Hollow School broke her heart and thrilled her soul all at once. Dust floated in the sunlight pouring through broken windows, and the air smelled of old paper, chalk, and forgotten days. The blackboard still bore faint writing, a sentence half erased by time. Lesson 23. Remember. When Clara lit her small oil lamp and began sweeping the floors, she noticed something odd. The desks, carved and nicked by long-ago hands, all bore names, initials, hearts, little drawings. But some of them looked too fresh, the grooves sharp and dark as though carved only yesterday. That night she wrote her first entry in her teaching journal. "The children will return Monday." The school feels alive, in a way I can't explain. Monday came, and with it, 10 children, barefoot, shy and silent as ghosts. They entered one by one, their eyes darting around the classroom. Some carried small slates, others clutched bits of charcoal or broken pencils. "Good morning," Clara greeted cheerfully. "I'm Miss Bell. We're going to learn together." The children only nodded, whispering among themselves when she turned her back. By midday, she noticed a pattern. Each child sat at the same desk every day, and no one ever touched the last row. When she asked why, little Tommy Pike mumbled, "Ain't right to sit there, ma'am." "That's where they used to be, they?" Clara asked. But Tommy only shook his head. That afternoon, after the children had gone home, she lingered behind to clean. On one of the unused desks, she noticed new letters carved into the wood, as if someone had been working hastily during the lesson. It read, "Don't forget us." The edges were still rough to the touch, and the wood warm. Clara stared at the carving until her lantern's flame trembled. "Some child playing tricks," she whispered to herself. But deep down, she wasn't sure. She ran her fingers over the letters. They weren't just words. There was pressure behind them, almost emotion. When she turned to close the door for the night, she thought she heard a faint scratching sound. A quill on paper? Nails on wood? She froze and listened. The air was still. Then, just as she stepped outside, she heard a soft voice, high and childlike, whisper behind her, "Miss." She turned sharply, but there was no one there. The next morning, the carving was gone. The desk looked brand new, smooth, unmarked, polished by unseen hands. But when she looked closer, she noticed faint scratches beneath the surface, only visible in morning light. They spelled the same words again, almost pleading, "Don't forget us." That day, she paid closer attention to the boy who always sat alone. Eli Harper, small for his age, quiet, with deep brown eyes that seemed far older than the rest. His hands were covered in ink stains, and his writing was neater than any child she'd ever seen. After class, as the others ran home, she asked gently, "Eli, do you know who might be carving on the desks?" He looked down. "No, ma'am." When she pressed further, his eyes lifted, hesitant but honest. "Sometimes they write back." "They?" she asked. "The desks," he said simply. "When they're lonely?" When they miss their teacher, he said it with such certainty that Clara didn't know whether to scold him or shiver. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Eli Harper, age 10, intelligent but withdrawn, speaks of the desks as though they are alive. Either the child has a grand imagination, or this place remembers too much." On Wednesday, while cleaning the teacher's desk, Clara discovered a small false drawer at the back. Inside lay a folded piece of yellowed paper, fragile as moth wings. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was faded but legible. "To whoever teaches next, the children hear them too. Please be kind. They remember everything." M. Clara whispered. "Mabel Mienton." The name rang a faint bell from her contract. The previous teacher who had vanished during the snowstorm of 1897. The townsfolk said she and her students never returned. Clara's hands trembled as she read the note again. The ink wasn't smudged by time. It was smeared as though written in haste or fear. That night, a thunderstorm rolled through the hills. Clara stayed late, finishing lessons by lantern light. Each clap of thunder rattled the windows, and rain lashed against the glass like thrown stones. She was about to leave when she noticed the chalk on the blackboard. It began to move. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then deliberate strokes appeared, forming shaky words across the slate. "We were here." She stumbled backward, heart pounding. The words glowed faintly for a second, then vanished as the lantern flickered out. In the dark, she could hear faint giggling, soft, innocent laughter that faded with the storm. When dawn came, the board was clean, but on the floor beneath it, written in chalk dust, were 10 small handprints. The next morning, Clara questioned her class. "Did anyone come into the school last night?" All shook their heads. Then little Sarah Lee, barely 7, raised her hand. "Mama said her grandpapa went to this school. He told stories about the desks that talked, but one winter they said he didn't come home." "What happened to him?" Clara asked gently. Sarah's lips trembled. "Mama said the hill took him." A hush fell over the room. Even Eli lowered his eyes. That afternoon, as Clara walked home, she looked up toward the ridge beyond the schoolhouse. A steep hill overgrown with brambles and mist. Locals said no one went there anymore. The hill had buried too many secrets beneath its snow. Determined to find the truth, Clara climbed into the schoolhouse attic that weekend. Dust coated everything: forgotten books, cracked slates, an old globe split along its equator. At the back, under a tarp, she found a wooden chest. Inside was an attendance ledger dated 1896 to 1897. Her breath caught. 10 names, the same number of desks, filled the page for December. Each one was crossed out abruptly with red ink. Beside them, in a different hand, was a single, chilling word: lost. No withdrawal notes, no explanations, just lost. She ran her fingers over the paper. The ink, though faded, seemed almost alive. It stained her fingertips red. That night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of scratching came from outside her window, like someone carving into wood. When she gathered her courage to look, she saw nothing, except a single word newly etched into her porch railing: remember. At midnight, Clara returned to the schoolhouse, lantern trembling in her hand. The wind howled through the gaps in the roof, and the floorboards creaked beneath her feet. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer. She placed the lantern on the teacher's desk and waited. Slowly, faint voices began to rise, laughter, whispers, the sound of pencils scratching across paper. Then she heard it clearly. A child's voice near her ear, "Miss Clara." She spun around. The room was empty. Her lantern flickered, and as light danced across the desks, she saw it, fresh writing appearing one word at a time on the wood. "We never went home." Her breath caught. The air grew heavy, almost mournful, as if 10 unseen hearts sighed together. Tears filled her eyes. "Then maybe," she whispered, "it's time someone took you there." The lantern flame steadied, and for the first time since she arrived, the schoolhouse fell utterly silent, peaceful, almost listening. The next morning, Clara took the long road into town, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. She needed answers about Miss Mabel Minton, the teacher whose initials were on that letter. She found them in a small, faded house at the edge of Dunhaven, where old Widow Crenshaw lived, a woman whose memory was said to stretch back farther than anyone's patience. The widow listened quietly as Clara spoke of the carvings, the whispers, and the children who called from the desks. When Clara finished, the old woman's eyes filled with sorrow. "It was the winter of 1997, she began softly. "The storm came fast, without mercy. Miss Mabel had 10 pupils that day. She tried to lead them down the hill toward safety, but the snow swallowed them whole. They never reached town. Some say the schoolhouse itself kept their souls, holding them close, afraid to let go." Clara's voice quivered. "You mean their bodies were never found?" The widow shook her head. "Never. But when the thaw came, the school still stood. And strange things began happening there. Letters on the walls, sounds in the night, as if the place was alive with children that never grew up." Outside, a cold wind moaned across the valley, the same sound that drifted down from Hickory Hollow. That night, Clara didn't light her lamp. She simply sat in the dark, listening to the wind and wondering if maybe, just maybe, the widow was right. Clara returned to the schoolhouse at dawn with a single purpose: to set those children free. She carried 10 candles, one for each name in the ledger, and placed them gently on the desks. As she lit them, the flame flickered as though each desk sighed in relief. "I know you're here," she said softly. "I don't know how or why, but I promise you, I will not forget. I will remember your names, your laughter, your lessons. You're not lost anymore." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faint as breath, came the sound of chalk scratching across the board. Slowly, trembling letters formed on their own. "Thank you, Miss Clara." Her heart swelled and broke all at once. She fell to her knees, tears shining in the candlelight. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the schoolhouse didn't feel haunted. It felt loved. The next day, Eli Harper lingered after class. He stood by the window, watching the light dance on the dusty glass. "Miss Clara," he said finally, "I've seen her too." Clara looked up. "Seen who?" "The teacher before you. Miss Mabel. She stands there sometimes, right where you're standing. She looks sad, but when you talk, she smiles. She told me something." Clara's voice trembled. "What did she say, Eli?" Eli turned toward her, eyes wide and solemn. "She said the children want their story told. That's how they'll find peace." Clara felt the words settle in her chest like truth itself. "Then we'll tell it," she said, "together." Eli smiled faintly, a quiet, knowing smile. And for a fleeting moment, Clara thought she saw the faintest shadow of another teacher's hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Over the next week, Clara gave her students a new assignment, something no teacher in Kentucky had ever done before. Each of you, she said, will choose one name from the old ledger. You'll imagine who that child was, what games they played, what dreams they had, what made them laugh. We'll write their stories so the world never forgets them again. At first, the children were unsure, but as the days passed, their imaginations awakened something sacred. Little Sarah Lee wrote about a girl who wanted to be a baker. Tommy wrote about a boy who carved wooden toys for his sister. And Eli, quiet, watchful Eli, wrote about a child who always sat by the window and listened to the wind, believing it carried the voices of angels. Each day, they read the stories aloud. The room glowed warmer, the air softer. Even the walls seemed to breathe again. And every night after they left, Clara would find one new word carved into a desk, a word that matched the story told that day. Joy, play, hope, home. It was the final day of storytelling. The children gathered in a circle as the last story was read aloud, Eli's story. When he finished, silence filled the schoolhouse. Then the wind outside rose softly, swirling through the open window, carrying with it a sound. Faint humming, a melody. The desks began to glow, faint golden light seeping from their carvings. The humming grew louder, forming words, voices, children's laughter, singing a tune so pure it brought tears to Clara's eyes. And across every desk, new words appeared, not carved harshly, but etched like whispers of gratitude. Thank you, Miss Clara. We can rest now. The light faded gently, the humming quieted, and for the first time since that tragic winter of 1897, Hickory Hollow School was still. The next morning, Clara arrived early, afraid that perhaps it had all been a dream. But the schoolhouse was quiet, beautifully, peacefully quiet. The desks, once rough and scarred, now looked smooth and polished. The carvings were gone, the air clean and bright. Eli arrived first, as always. He stepped inside, looked around, and smiled. They're gone, aren't they? Yes, Clara said softly, her voice breaking. They're finally home. He nodded. Then I guess we did what they asked. When the bell rang that morning, Clara felt something new, a lightness in her heart, as though part of the hill itself had lifted a long burden. Outside, sunlight poured over the valley, and the wind that once whispered sorrow now carried laughter instead. When word spread of what had happened, the townsfolk, who had long kept their distance, began visiting the school. One by one they came, mothers, grandfathers, even old Widow Crenshaw. They helped repair the roof, repaint the walls, and replace the cracked windows. Behind the school, they built a small stone monument bearing the names from the old ledger. Above it, a single inscription, gone but not forgotten. Hickory Hollow remembers. On the day it was finished, Clara stood before the monument with her students and read each name aloud. The townsfolk joined her, and for the first time in 30 years, the hills echoed not with grief, but gratitude. Years passed. Clara stayed in Hickory Hollow, teaching generation after generation of children. Under her care, the school became a place of laughter and kindness, no longer haunted but hallowed. Each spring she hosted the Day of Stories, where students would share tales inspired by the children of 1897. It became a beloved tradition, one that spread through neighboring towns. Other teachers began holding Remembrance Days, inspired by Miss Bell's Miracle School. And every time Clara stood before her class and looked out at those bright, eager faces, she felt a quiet warmth near the window, as if someone was standing beside her, smiling. In 1927, after 20 years of teaching, Miss Clara Bell passed away peacefully in her sleep. When the new teacher, a young woman named Miss Ada Lynn, opened the old desk for the first time, she found an envelope tucked in the back drawer. It was addressed in delicate handwriting. To the next teacher, if the wind whispers, don't be afraid. Listen closely. It's just the children saying hello. Teach them with kindness. They always write back when you care enough to read. CB. Miss Lynn wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter through the trees. Decades later, the school finally closed. The world had changed. Cars roared through the valleys now, and new brick schools stood in nearby towns. When workers came to restore the old building, they found the wood strong despite its age. One of them, sanding the teacher's desk, paused when his tool caught on something etched faintly beneath the surface. He knelt to read it. In delicate, flowing letters it said, "The children are safe. Hickory Hollow remembers." The man smiled, feeling an unexplainable warmth fill the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the open windows, soft and familiar, almost like laughter. And though the desks were silent, their story would live forever, passed down through the hills of Kentucky, where memory and kindness met, and where one brave teacher had listened long enough to bring peace to the forgotten.